So I'm honored to be joined by Busisiwe Mokwena, very well respected, very well known South African journalist who covers Banyana, the South African women's national football team. And the first thing I wanted to start by asking you was, how do you feel like a few days before a WAFCON? Because usually this is like almost the favorite time of the year for me before an AFCON, which is sort of the tournament that I specialize in, because I really think this is the one opportunity where the entire African men's footballing community can get together in one place.
Yep.
Something similar. Is there a lot of excitement just because of the sort of celebration that's about to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It always is an exciting time, towards the women's AFCON. I mean, because especially some of the tournaments were skipped, and when the time comes and we are able to watch and experience women's football on the continent, it's always a beautiful time. Nerve-wracking to a certain extent, um, when thinking that at some point South Africa is going to play against Nigeria, who are our biggest foes, over the years, although we are now starting to play way better against them and beat them more often. It is a quite an exciting time because also it's also a display of the kind of talent that South Africa has. The younger players that are coming in into the squad, and just a chance for them to display not only to South Africans or people who follow women's football in South Africa, just South Africans in general, and the whole continent on what they can offer on the field.
Because low key, South African men's football since let's say over the last 2 years has kind of been on the rise. I mean, they finished third and third place at the AFCON. In the CAF Champions League, Sundowns and Pirates had been doing pretty well. And then even like the coaches that South Africa has produced, like the young, talented, I think of like Rovlani Mokwena, I'm thinking of Fadlu, Davids and things. Um, has there been a similar dynamic in women's football in South Africa where there's been a lot of exciting coaches? Maybe I know Sundowns did, we know, fairly well in the Women's Champions League. They finished runners up and then they won in 2022 and 2023. Would you say that there's a mirror effect, or would you say that domestic football in South Africa, from the women's side of things, still lags behind?
Honestly, still does lag behind. I think maybe the main issue is the lack of a professional league and not having a lot of corporates, coming in and sponsoring women's football and marketing the game really well. I think that's where the main issue comes from. Even though there are a lot more people since maybe in the last 5 or 4 years who are now starting to go to women's football matches, it's still not becoming as great or as I would like to in terms of, the time. Because I started covering women's football in 2010, and until to this date, I can count a number of journalists in South Africa who regularly cover women's football. And that's also where it needs to change. Corporate South Africa is not going to come on board if they do not see the stories of women's football. That means the honor is on us as journalists to cover more women's football. I think, yeah, that's where it will change as well. Also, at schools level, we see more um boys football more than we do girls football. An example, my son's friend, my nephew, at his school, I think there's only about, I know he's still young, he plays in the under 8 team, but in his team under 8, there's only 3 girls. So that means the school cannot have, a fully fledged team that can play with other schools when, during the football season. So that's where also it needs to change. Getting more schools, getting having girls teams, because then we'll see more competitions between schools and get to see more younger players coming and flourishing on in women's football. Another example that I would like to make is that, so there's two semi-professional leagues in South Africa. Well, the one is an amateur league and the other is like semi-professional because it's flagged on TV every weekend. The Sasso League the amateur league is, in some teams, you find players who are 9 years old, 14 years old, and the teams that they play against, there's players who are either 20 or 18. So you see now the level of competition is unfair to a certain point. So I feel that if we have more girls competition at, from under 7, under 8, because I mean my nephew has been playing since he was 7 years, so under, under 8 and under 9. If we get more girls playing at that level, it will be easier to see the transition when the players get to under 15, under 16, under 17, and represent South Africa at tournaments like the Region 5 competition, which is currently happening, where under 19 players are playing. So unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. I had hoped that, with how Banyana did at the Women's World Cup in 2023, we're going to see, the number grow. I mean, they became the first South African senior team to qualify for knockout stages. We have not seen that with Bafana yet. So I had hoped that with that kind of performance, we'd see more people coming on board. But I don't know. Unfortunately, it seems like we have to wait a bit longer.
Yeah, so the success of Banyana hasn't necessarily trickled down into the grassroots level, we could say. You think that's fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. Yes, maybe a lot more girls are saying, okay, now I can also play football. After watching Banyana play on TV and Banyana winning the women's AFCON, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done, like proper structures, academies, schools, primary schools need to get involved. Even high schools also need to get involved so that we get to see the women's game just growing really well.
So can I ask you, because this, I feel like I'm hearing the same story that I hear in a lot of different countries on our continent is, there needs to be more investment. There needs to be, we journalists need to pay more attention. It seems like a similar narrative, and sometimes it feels like a chicken and an egg scenario where it's like the
It,
the businessmen or the businesswomen will say, okay, well, if there's crowds, then I'll sponsor it, and then
yeah,
sometimes we'll say, well, if you give us money, then we can stage the
and then we'll have
then a
crowd.
crowd will come,
Yeah.
right? So where do you fall on in this sort of discussion? How do you think? I know there's no magic wand solution, but if you could give maybe like one or two clear recommendations or clear things that you think needs to be done in the short term, what do you think that would be?
Okay, maybe I'll just go back to what I see in South Africa. South Africans are fans of winning. We love winning. When we see our teams win, you will see opinion pieces on with newspapers, online platforms, even on social media. We see regular South Africans commenting about such and such a player or such and such an athlete. However, when it's regular season, those people are quiet. So that's where it needs to change. We need to um, have a change of the mindset that we only support uh, women's football when they win, when they do well at AFCON, or when they do well at the World Cup. We need to invest our time as South Africans, as regular citizens, to go watch the clubs in our communities.
So everyone,
To
better the fans, the journalists.
the fans, everyone. I feel that it starts in the communities where these teams are playing. I was making an example earlier about the Sasso League. The teams in the Sasso League, yes, they depend on a grant, which honestly is not a lot. 30,000 rand a year is not a lot to play about. Well, it depends on how many teams in that region or maybe that province. Or maybe let's say, for an example, if they play in Gauteng, there'll be two divisions, maybe 8 teams each, and so that means 16 games, right? 16 games in the one section, and the top two teams will play to qualify to become the provincial champ. So now that amount is not enough to make sure that those teams are able to secure grants, secure referees, and everything else that they need, because those players still need to go to training during the week before they go to the games on the weekends. As the community that is watching Springs Home Sweepers in Guatemala Springs, you see that, this coach is trying, this club owner is trying. I have a little shop that maybe if I make, an extra profit when this team hosts one of their games, why don't I just supply them with water or snacks or drinks, or if they're going to play in the provincial finals, can I just donate so that they get, to that game? It starts there. As communities, we need to do better in investing to make sure that the clubs in our leagues do well, because that's where the national coaches are going to find those Banyana players or those Bandwana players in those communities. We cannot brag about a player and say, "Oh my gosh, Busisiwe, grew up in a team from my community." But as a community member who had means to help the club that I was playing in, we do not do anything. You see, a kid is talented, however, they do not have boots. You have means. That's also an investment to making sure that, we do have those future players, for Banyana in the future, or for Bantwana, or however far they would like to go.
So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit to talk about the national team.
Yeah.
Um, what so for somebody that's from the outside, I've read headlines about a pay dispute. Can you just sort of give us the rundown about what happened in terms of preparation, just very briefly, if possible?
You know what? When it comes to the pay dispute, it breaks my heart because, like I indicated earlier, I had been covering women's football since 2010, and I'm sure as far back as 2012 or 2013, I have reported about pay disputes for Banyana, maybe once or twice a year since then, which is heartbreaking. Um, because then, for me personally, it looks like the federation is not seeing the progress that is happening in the national team. It's yeah, okay. Like I'm saying, it's a sore point for me because I cannot, over the last 15 years, report about the same thing every year.
Must be getting sick of it, yeah.
It is. It is. I'd like to write about other things because now we see players deciding to retire because of the issues around the team, which to a certain extent they find themselves not being able to perform as they would love to because those issues are affecting them. So it's just heartbreaking. But just going back to your question again, um personally, I was not really happy with the kind of preparation the team had. Number one, the semi-professional league that I touched on a bit earlier didn't really start on time this year. Again, it's a funds issue. So the sponsor and the federation were not coming to terms on um some financial issues. So most of the games we're not playing. We're seeing only one matches a weekend. And those were the only matches. The matches who were playing are the matches on TV because now there's an agreement with the television station that has to be a match on such and such a day. So now for me, because that took a bit longer, I think between March or late Feb until late March to almost April, we're only seeing one game a week. So now that means the players are not getting enough game time. A problem. Uh Also with the team selection, how are you selecting players when you're not seeing how they're playing? Another problem. Personally, I would have liked to see a bit more friendly matches coming in. Yes, we did have that Three Nations tournament between Banyana, Zambia, and Botswana, which I think was well thought of because those three teams at the moment are the strongest in our region, in the Kosafa region. So that was well thought of. But I think maybe another 2 or 3 more friendlies would have done a world of good for the team before they went to Morocco. So honestly, I am nervous about how they're gonna do. I know that the group won't be that difficult for them, but what's going to happen once they get to the knockout stages? Yeah, I just hope also all the issues that are surrounding the team, the payment and the bonus issues do not, interfere with how the players want to perform on the field. I'm nervous. I'm nervous at the same time. I'm quite excited because this is the first time that we're going to the tournament as defending champions.
Yeah.
You see.
Uh,
So yeah, I just hope the mindset of the players is in a better stage, or and they're able to perform what they need to do on the field.
Finally, two last questions. Can you tell us about Desiree Ellis a little bit? Because um, she's, as a name, sort of as a brand, I think, has grown since Banyana won the last WAFCON. Um, and I think, unfortunately, on our continent, maybe like that brand name recognition lacks a little bit, not in terms of women's players, because I think we have that in like a lot of good players that I think everybody around the continent recognizes, but maybe the coaches a little bit, especially female coaches. Can you tell us about her as a coach and what she means to Banyana, what she means to South Africa?
True. I think because she's a former player, former captain of Banyana, that plays a huge role rather in how the players want to perform for her on the field. Her name carries a huge weight. I mean, she was not the first captain, but she was one of the early captains of Banyana. So that only just that just brings something huge for her as a coach. At club level, she really get to coach a lot of teams, and also maybe some of the teams that she coached did not get to a level as compared to others, maybe the likes of Sundowns or the likes of Palace Super Falcons or the others. So, sure, I think it's a tricky question to answer, but I think for the players, she brings a lot to the team because of the name and what that first class of Banyana did, or how they were able to sacrifice themselves as players, even though the odds were against them. I think for them it was much worse because
Sure.
they didn't have a kit of their own. When they were playing other countries, they had to wait for Bafana, to after their games, and then they check, okay, who can wear, what, who fits into what. So it's their story is much crazier. So, but I think because of that, that class of players never gave up. That's why we're seeing the likes of Jimmy Sobo Senwe today, who are doing really well and playing overseas as well.
Mexico, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true that sometimes we get frustrated and we think that things aren't progressing, but then if you rewind 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you realize actually no, that's
Just in my head, I had there's a picture of her wearing oversized oversized. Oh my gosh! But hey, look at where she is today, and just look at where women's football is today. It's a complete turnaround. Even though I did say, or I still do say, we are
still so much to do. Yeah.
like a lot of steps behind, but it's completely different to what it was back then.
Final question. Um, which player or who or what are you most looking forward to watching at this particular WAFCON?
The Banyana player.
Either or.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be one. You can give me two or three if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple. Oh, actually. I'm excited to see what Barbara Banda is going to do at the tournament, especially after what happened to her and Rachel. Well, both Rachels, and they could not play at the last Women's AFCON. I would like to see how them being present in this team would change the dynamic of the Copa Queens, because they are a very strong team. I mean, in the last Women's AFCON, they got to the top four. So I'm just imagining if those players were there in 2022, how far would they have gotten? So now I want to see, like, I'm really excited to see what they will produce this year. So yeah, so Barbara Panda, Rachel Kudananji from Zambia. And then South Africa, because this is Jermaine's last um, Banyana tournament, I would like to see what she can do. I know she always brings her best, always brings her best. But seeing it being her last one, I want to see how memorable for all of us it will be, for her as a player and her teammates, and us fans who have watched her playing for the national teams. Um, since, I don't know why I'm being emotional, since the under 17, because okay, I don't want to go into it. I don't know why I'm becoming emotional. But I remember when South Africa first qualified for a Women's World Cup, she was in that team. She was the only player that scored for South Africa. Yes, we are not out of the group stages, but everyone was like, who is this player who is doing well for South Africa? I remember, I think I did a story on her, and I was lucky to get an interview with her dad, and just to find out the background of how she started football and how she was discovered by a former Banyana coach Joseph Mkonza, who qualified Banyana for the first Olympics in 2012. How Coach Mkonza, at the time, he was with I think he was in the selection team for Banyana. I don't seem to remember exactly, but he was one of the coaches that discovered her, and she was picked for the under 17 team that went to Trinidad and Tobago, if I'm not mistaken. And scored that one goal. So yeah, I think in the Banyana team, definitely her. Um, who else am I super excited to see in the Banyana team? Um, Amokelang Mutau plays in Mexico as well. I'd like to see how much her game has changed at that level. Because obviously playing at in a professional league in Mexico, that will surely have some kind of impact on how she plays at continental level. Yeah, I think so far those are the three players who are top of mind. Also from Ghana, Evelyn Badu, when she was playing at the CAF Women's Champions League, which I think 2021, she was quite incredible. And we haven't seen Ghana at the Women's AFCON since 2018. So I'd like to see how much she has progressed and has grown, and her game has changed. So yeah, I think so far those are the players I am really looking forward to see.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, we've had a few WAFCON stolen from us, but slowly but surely getting back into the group now. Thanks again, Busisiwe. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience. And yeah, I, as well as I think many others, are really looking forward to watching this WAFCON. So
Yeah.
thanks again, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Yeah.